Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. Okay. The story of the rebellion of Korach is well known. Korach gathers 250 people who were fit to be head of the Sanhedrin, to be head of the Jewish court. And they rebel against Moses. Korach tells Moshe the following: Lama tisnasu al kahal Hashem. Why do you make yourself bigger over the rest of us? Who made you boss? Who put you in control? Why are you the leader of the Jewish people? Now, Rashi tells us the real reason of the straw that broke the camel's back. Why did Korach all of a sudden argue against Moshe Rabbeinu? And Rashi says the following, that the father of Moshe was Amram. He had a brother, Yitzhar, Chevron, and Uziel. In other words, they were a family of 4 brothers. Korach said like this: Amram is the oldest, so the oldest gets a double portion. So if he gets a double portion, it makes sense that Moses should become the first leader. The second portion goes to Aaron, he becomes the high priest. But now the third gift, or the third position, should go to me, because I am Korach, the son of Yitzhar, which is the next brother over after Amram. In the meantime, Moses gave over the leadership to the son of Uziel, the youngest of the 4 brothers. So when Uziel's son, Elitzaphan ben Uziel, was established and appointed as the leader of the tribe, Korach said, now something is fishy here. It should really be me, and now I want to question and undermine the entire leadership of Moses and Aaron. That is the reason according to Pshat, the simple reason. But we have to look deeper. And that is, the story of Korach takes place right after the sin and the episode of the spies. You would think that Korach would take a lesson from what happened to the spies, that all the spies were killed, they died, and the Jews were now punished to remain in the desert for 40 years. And yet, immediately after this occasion, Korach now rebels against Moshe. What was the logic behind this? Furthermore, what was the punishment of Korach? The ground opened up and swallowed him and his family alive. This was the punishment for Korach and all the other Korachs in the world who stand up against the Jewish people. However, we find something interesting. It says that Korach and his family, together with Dasan and Aviram, they were swallowed up alive. But the 250 men, who Moshe Rabbeinu says, you should come tomorrow and bring fire pans, and upon this you shall bring ketores, incense. They were not swallowed up alive. They were burned by fire. In other words, Moshe told Korach, if you think that you deserve to become the high priest, to take over Aaron's position, then the greatest avodah, the greatest service, and the most envied service in the Holy Temple was the ketores, was the incense. And therefore, all of you shall bring incense and stand before the Holy Temple, and we will see. If God chose Aaron, then he will be the one that is answered. If God chose you, then you will be the one that is answered. But remember, this ketores is not only a blessing, it's also a curse. Because anyone who brings it and offers it, that's not supposed to, is punishable by death. And there could only be one high priest, says Moses. And furthermore, Rashi tells us that Moses says, I too want to be the high priest. I too envy the position of the high priest, but I can't. There's only one. There's only one high priest, and that's Aaron. And yet you think all 250 of you people can become the high priest? It's impossible. So in other words, we need to understand what was the logic here. How is it possible that all the 250 people who are fit to be the head of the Sanhedrin, which means brilliant people, smart people, intellectual people, and godly people. These are people who now challenge Moses, and each one of them thinks that they're going to be the high priest. There could only be one high priest, and the rest are going to die. And yet they all stand there with their fire pans, and they are offering ketores, incense, before Almighty God. They weren't stupid people. They were smart people. So how can they do such a erroneous act? So let us begin with Korach. What was the argument of Korach? Now in truth, Korach, together with the 250 people, they all rebelled against Moses and Aharon. However, the agenda was different. The agenda of Korach was one thing, and the agenda of the 250 were another thing. What was the agenda of Korach, and what was their agenda? To preface this by saying, when we serve God in our daily life, there are two basic approaches. There are two basic services. One is called Ratzui, and one is called Shuv. Ratzui means to run towards God, to become more spiritual, and Shuv means to return, to bring godliness down into the world, to manifest and pervade the physical world with spirituality. And each day we do both. We study Torah. Torah is compared to water, and therefore we bring God down into the world. When we pray to God, this is the concept of Ratzui, to run to God, and that is the idea of fire, which goes upwards. So these are the two approaches. Korach comes to Moses and he says, Lama tisnasu akalashem. We just had the episode of the spies. What was the story of the spies? What was the sin of the spies? Now, we know that these 10 spies, the 10 of the 12, they came back with a negative report. They were chosen by Moses himself. Moses was the man of God. He spoke to God face to face. He was a prophet, the greatest of all prophets. And he understood who he was choosing. He chose men of valor, men of stature. And yet, they come back with a negative report. Chassidic says that the spies went into the land of Israel. And they said, look, in the land of Israel, we have to now work the land. And therefore, we have to be involved with the physical, everyday, mundane world. We just received the Torah from God on Sinai. We were slaves for 210 years. We worked enough. Now it's time to become a bit spiritual, to learn the Torah a little. God gave us this amazing gift, priceless, a treasure, which is the Torah, which is the most brilliant intellect amongst all the nations of the world. And all the nations of the world acknowledge this. So right after we get the Torah, now we should go into the world and become business people. On the contrary, sit down in the yeshiva. Let us learn for a few years well and become knowledgeable in the Torah. Then we'll go into business, right? Look at the everyday world. Look at the average Jew today, average religious Jew. For the first 20 years, 30 years, they learn Torah and they become proficient in the knowledge of the Talmud. Then they get married, and then they have children, and they go into business, and they become billionaires. There's plenty of time to become a billionaire. But first, put the effort into the knowledge of Torah. So the spies said, we just received the Torah. Let us learn it for a number of years. And then we'll go into the land of Israel, begin fighting wars and plowing the land. So it didn't come from a bad place. It came from a very good place. They had good intentions. They wanted to raise the knowledge and education of the Jewish people. This was the intention of the spies. Yet, they were punished because it was a sin. Because God says that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not to live in a cocoon and be all day in the synagogue and the yeshiva. That's not the ultimate goal. It's important. We need to do this daily. But that's not the ultimate purpose of why the soul came down to this world and traveled thousands of light years from heaven down to earth into a physical human body. The purpose is dira b'tachtonim, to create a dwelling place for God in this world. And how do we do this? Through physical mitzvahs. And you couldn't do the physical mitzvahs in the desert. Only very few. Because many of the mitzvahs are only applicable when you are living in your own land and you have your fields and you're able to bring the trumbas and the maisros and the bikurim, etc., etc. Many of the commandments of Peah, Leket, Shecham, Peah, etc., etc. All of these things take place when you go into the land. So Moses tells the spies, you're making a big mistake. The ultimate objective is to do with the physical. And it's about the physical, everyday, practical mitzvah. Okay, now we understand where the spies went wrong. They thought it was only about spirituality. They thought it was only about Torah knowledge. Moses says, no, it's about going into the physical land, about the physical mitzvahs. Okay, if that is the case, comes along Korach. Korach says, hold on. Till now, I thought it was about spirituality. If we're talking about spirituality, if we're talking about the knowledge of the Talmud and the Torah, Moses, there's no question you are smarter than me. There's no question, Moses, you are the true Talmud Chacham, the Rosh Hashiva. You are the biggest rabbi on the face of the earth. You spoke to God face to face. You learned the whole Torah. But now you're telling me the most important thing is the deed, is the action. It's about putting on the tefillin. It's about giving the charity. It's about lighting the Shabbos candles. It's the physical thing. If that is the case, lama tisnaswa kal Hashem. Why are you better than me? I put on tefillin, you put on tefillin. You give tzedakah, I give tzedakah. And by the way, Korach was very rich. So he can give more tzedakah than Moses. There's a terminology till today, Korach reich. A person is very rich. He's rich like Korach. So if that is the case, Korach says it's all about the practical deed. Lama tisnaswa kal Hashem. Why do you make yourself the big man on campus? Who made you the big knacker? What made you the big boss? If that is the case, I should be the one who's in control. So Korach basically argues it's about dira b'tachtonim. It's about bringing God down onto this world. It's about the idea of shuv, returning. Aha. If that is the case, where does Korach go wrong? And the answer is that you need a balance. It's not about radical extremism. You have to have a balance. It has to be a balance of heaven and earth, a balance of fire and water, a balance of running and returning. You need to have the mitzvah, the physical mitzvah. And that is the main thing. The main thing is the deed. As Nike says, just do it. However, we also need the spirituality. We also need the fire. We also need the prayer. We also need the knowledge of Torah. Korach, however, felt, no, lama tisnaswa kal Hashem. What makes you bigger? It's all about the action. It's all about bringing God down. If that is the case, you're going to go down. So the ground opens up and swallows Korach alive into the ground because he was not balanced. You want to go down? You want to bring godliness down into the world? I'll bring you down even further. And so he's swallowed up alive into the earth. And so shall it be with all the other Korachs, God willing, who try to rebel against God and the Jewish people. Now, the 250 men had a different complaint. They had a different argument. They had a different philosophy. They wanted spirituality. We know that the two sons of Aaron, we spoke about this in the book of Leviticus, on the day that the Mishkan opened, the temple opened, they went in and they brought a fire, ketores, incense, on a fire pan. They went into the Holy of Holies and they died. The Rechaim HaKadosh tells us that what was the reason they died? What was their sin? The sin was that they wanted to run, to have a ratzui, a yearning to connect with God, but they had no desire to return. They took a one-way ticket to God, to spirituality. They OD'd on holiness. That was their sin. They OD'd on spirituality. They died in the synagogue. They never came home. You got to go to the synagogue, but you can't die in the synagogue. You got to take the synagogue home with you. I always argue, you see the men, they come into the shul, they put on a yarmulke, but they leave, they take the yarmulke off. It means they died in the shul. You got to take the yarmulke with you out into the street. You got to take that spirituality and now pervade the everyday world with that holiness. But the sin of the two sons of Aaron was that they only wanted spirituality. They wanted to separate themselves from the everyday world. But it was out of love for God. They tasted and they yearned to have this deep connection and love and feel God in their everyday life. And so when they went into the Holy of Holies and they brought the incense, which gave them the ability to truly rise higher and higher, they could not return. As the Orach Chaim articulates it, that they felt the sweetness and the love and the spirituality and the godliness, they couldn't come back. This is the same yearning and the same love that the 250 men had at that moment. When they heard that there was an escape, there was an opportunity to connect with God and leave the everyday world, they said, we want to do it. We don't care we're going to die. For that one moment to connect with God on the most deepest level is worth sacrificing everything. It came from a deep yearning and love to connect to Hashem. And this concept we find happened during the Second Holy Temple. During the Second Holy Temple, we are told that there were 300 Kohanim Gedolim, the 300 high priests during the Second Holy Temple. Now, a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, had to be very holy. If you went into the Holy of Holies, on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur, and you had with you a sin, you would die that year. And very often you would die right there in the Holy of Holies. And that's why they had to put a rope around the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, in case he dropped dead, God forbid, they had to pull him out. So it was a very challenging and dangerous mission to go into the Holy of Holies. So the Talmud says that the first Kohen Gadol lasted 80 years, the next lasted 40 years, and after that, each year there was a new Kohen Gadol, a new high priest. Now, if you read the Gemara on a very, very external level, it seems that they were sinners because they paid their way into the government and they paid their way into the priesthood so they would be able to be that high priest. So the Gemara considers that to be very derogatory, that look, they paid their way, they didn't deserve it, they didn't earn it, etc., etc., and the fact is they died every year. But again, as the Rebbe asks the question, and the question begs to be asked, if they knew they were going to die, why would they do it? Each year, they saw that the Kohen Gadol died. And this happened 1 year, and 2 years, and 3 years, and 4 years, and 5 years. So the first 2 years, you can say they thought, I'm different. But after this goes on for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and each year, the Kohen Gadol gets elected, or he pays his way into office, and then he dies that year, why would the next guy pay to die? Why would he pay his way into the office so that he should die the next year? And the answer is the same, says the Rebbe, that the Jews had a deep yearning and love for God, for spirituality, and they wanted to have that sensation. They wanted to be able to feel godliness down here in this world. And that was their yearning, and that was their desire, and that was their passion. And this is the same with the 250 men that were worthy of being the heads of the Sanhedrin, who were intellectual and smart. They too said, look, we want to have that holy experience. We talk about God every day, and we yearn to connect with God every day, and now we have an opportunity to bring the ketores, to bring the incense, which, by the way, the word incense, ketores in Hebrew, means to connect, to be a knot, to be one with God. We have the opportunity to truly become one with God. Why should we forsake this opportunity? So they knew they were not going to survive. And yet, they were thrilled with the opportunity to have this deep relationship with Almighty God. And so what does the Torah say? That the punishment was that a fire came down from heaven and consumed them. In other words, you want to connect with God, with spirituality, here you go. So they went up. Korach went down, and these guys went up. Now this answers a very interesting statement in Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, any machloikis, any argument, she'eina l'shem shemayim, which is not for the sake of heaven, zu machloikis Korah v'chol adosai. This is the argument of Korach and his people. Why does the Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avos, in chapter 5, Mishnah number 17, tell us a machloik is an argument not for the sake of heaven, l'shem shemayim. What's the terminology, l'shem shemayim? So here too the Rebbe explains l'shem shemayim means, shemayim is an acronym, eish umayim. What is heaven? Fire and water. Any argument which is not for the sake of shemayim is not a good argument. Why? Because it means you're either going for the fire or for the water. If it's for the sake of shemayim, like the machloikis of Shammai and Hillel, that's a good machloikis, a good argument. Because it's shemayim, it's balanced. There's fire and water involved. That's a good argument. But if you're arguing simply either for fire or for water, that's not a good argument. And then it will not be miskayim, it will not have any fruit, it will not be everlasting, it will not be sustainable. We have to have shamayim, we have to have heaven in our life. We need to have that balance of fire, eish, and water, running and returning, Torah and mitzvahs, prayer and charity. We have to have this combination. Then we're a healthy person. Then we are going to be sustainable. Then we are going to be continuous. Then we are going to be everlasting. So this is the message of Korach. Korach wanted to make a dira b'tachtonim. He wanted to bring God down into the world. However, on the other hand, he lacked the aspect of spirituality. And therefore, this is the message of Korach, to have a balance in our life, to bring spirituality, the study of Torah and mitzvahs and prayer, at the same time to go into the everyday world and spread the word to the nations of the world, to be a light unto the nations, to teach the 7 Noahide laws, that all the nations should know that they too are created in the image of God, and they too have a role in society and in creation, and through this to bring about the ultimate geula, the ultimate redemption. Yesterday was the 28th of Sivan, the day that the Lubavitcher Rebbe and his wife, the Rebbetzin, came to America, the shores of America, and began their holy work here. And this coming week is Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd of Tammuz, which is the day that is the day of the Rebbe's Yom HaYilullah, the Rebbe's passing. We know when a tzaddik leaves the world, that day he reaches his climax, he reaches his perfection, and each year on the day of his passing, the soul has a quantum leap, and those that are connected to the soul have also that quantum leap together with the tzaddik. And furthermore, as Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, that the idea of a yortzeit of a tzaddik is poel yeshuos b'kerev haaretz. It brings about tremendous salvations in the world. And all of the actions and all of the Torah study and all the good deeds that tzaddik did on the day of his yortzeit come together and testify before God and stands as a protection for the entire world. And finally, the Zohar says, "Tzaddik despate deshtake b'chula almin yatem b'chayoyi," that a tzaddik who leaves the world is actually found now more in the world than ever before. So we believe that the Rebbe is here more than ever before. So to share a few quick stories in honor of Gimel Tammuz. There was a soldier who fought in wars, many wars in Israel, and I spoke to him personally just recently. And he told me that after the wars, he became Baal Tshuva, he started to learn Torah, he was in Israel, then he came to America. And when he was in America, he asked permission to enter into the Rebbe's personal chamber, to have what he called yichidus, an audience with the Rebbe. The Rebbe would meet people a few times a week, starting 8:30 at night till about 6 in the morning. That was his schedule. During the day, he studied Torah, and at night, he would meet people. He slept about 3 hours a night. He would go home about 6 o'clock and be back in the office again a few hours later. The audience, the people that came to the Rebbe, you can imagine, was a very heavy load, and the job of the secretaries was to make sure that the line moved quickly. So when new people came to see the Rebbe, they would ask, what are you writing? Because they didn't want a person to walk in and start talking, and asking and having a conversation and a chat with the Rebbe. It would take an hour. They say, look, you don't talk. You write down what you want, you give it to the Rebbe talks to you. That's it. If the Rebbe talks to you, you answer. If not, you have basically 60 seconds. So the average Yechidus was 60 seconds. Then there were guys who were there for 2-3 hours. So this soldier writes over here a list, about like a laundry list, about 11 things he's going to talk to the Rebbe about. Rabbi Grona says, no, you're not writing this list. Give me the list. Just write your name and your mother's name and ask for a blessing. That's it you're doing. Okay. He had no choice. He pulls away the list. He's about to go into the Rebbe. He takes the paper that Rabbi Grona writes for him, and he puts it on the Rebbe's desk. The Rebbe reads it. And the Rebbe begins to answer the 11 questions that he wrote on the other paper. This is an eyewitness. He told this to me himself. The Rebbe began, the first question answers as follows. The second question answers as follows. He went through the entire list. That's one story. And this happened, by the way, numerous times. It wasn't only with that person, but I heard it myself from this individual. Another question, another story that happened with my grandfather. This was the opposite story. My grandfather was one of the first people that began to work with the Rebbe when the Rebbe came to America in the 1940s. As one of the shluchim told me, that when the Rebbe and my grandfather locked eyes, there was a love and a respect for each other, and they never separated. And my grandfather was totally dedicated to the Rebbe's work all the years. One time, my grandfather did something, and the Rebbe wasn't excited about it, and he told my grandfather. He was upset. And my grandfather was an American, he didn't like being criticized. So he basically sent in the keys of the organization to the Rebbe, and he wrote, I quit. You don't like me, so I'm giving up the job. The Rebbe saw the paper. He took his pencil. The Rebbe had a pencil, and he scratched through it, and the pencil went through the paper like, sei gesund, I'm not even listening to you, and he threw it out. He didn't accept his resignation. The next time my grandfather was in the office with the Rebbe for Yechidus, the Rebbe said to him, by the way, you should know what I do for you is because of my affection, my love for you. And he went on to say, and he mentioned other people's names. He said, look, you know that person, and you know that person, and you know that person. Look where they are today, and look where you are today. The point was, the Rebbe took him by the hand, and he molded him, and he guided him, and he mentored him, and he gave him tremendous, tremendous blessing and success. And my grandfather was the official interpreter of the Rebbe, and the right hand of the Rebbe in many, many areas over the years. But the point is that this was really what the Rebbe did for all of us in the generation. Those who went by the Rebbe for Dollar Sunday, and those who had the opportunity to go into Yechidus in the early years, know that the Rebbe looked at you and you felt that he went through your entire body. Now, not only did he go through your entire body, but he went through your entire history. He saw where you came and your potential where you're going to go. And when you left the office, you were 10 feet higher. You began to believe in yourself, and the Rebbe tried to reveal the potential of each individual. And finally, one last story. There was a Yid in Israel, a Jew in Israel, that he was married to his wife for 10 years. And after 10 years, there were no children. So it's customary in certain communities that if you're married for 10 years, if you have no children, then you divorce. And hopefully this way, you'll remarry and you'll have a child. So the man divorces his wife. And after he divorces his wife calls him up and says, by the way, I'm pregnant. Okay? He says, from me? Yeah, from you. You're pregnant from me. Okay, but so let's get remarried. Baruch Hashem. Thank God, God gave us a child. The problem is, however, he's a Kohen. And a Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. Even his own wife he can't marry. So if he divorces his wife, he's not allowed to remarry her. Halachically, if you're not a Kohen, you could divorce your wife 100 times. You could divorce your wife and remarry her. Divorce your wife and remarry her, as long as she does not marry somebody else. But if you're a Kohen cannot marry a divorcee, and now he divorced her, he cannot remarry her. So they go to all the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael in Israel, that's where he lives, and they ask permission maybe to remarry because it was a mistake. A mekachtos, if I would have known that she was pregnant, I never would have divorced her, so maybe the whole divorce is a mistake. No rabbi gave any heter. No rabbi gave any permission, and they couldn't do it. Finally, someone says, you should go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe in America. Maybe he could help you. If anyone could help you, it's him. He says, I'm not a Chabad, I'm not Lubavitch, I don't know. He says, look, what can you lose? Go. Okay, he gets a ticket, he goes to America. In those days already, the Rebbe was not having Yechidushin in the late 80s. There was a Sunday morning line, you had thousands of people around the block coming for the Rebbe's blessings. And if you had a moment to say a word, the Rebbe would say yes, no, and that's it. He moved further. And they tell him, have in mind, tell the Rebbe, quickly, I need a blessing, what should I do? He comes by the Rebbe and says, look, my wife's pregnant, I'm a Kohen, I divorced. The Rebbe says the following, ask your mother. Ask your mother. The guy thinks, I came all this way, and I was hoping the Rebbe would give me some insight, some halachic insight, find a tshuva somewhere, from some goyin in the previous generations to give me an opportunity to get remarried. He says, ask your mother. He's all upset, he's angry, I traveled all this way. Make a long story short, the people around him said, look, you came all this way. The Rebbe said, ask your mother, call your mother right now from here. He calls his mother. So I'm standing here in New York by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I asked him for some help on the situation. He said, ask your mother. The mother begins to cry. She says, how did the Rebbe know? He says, what do you mean? How did the Rebbe know? Says, we shielded you all these years. We didn't want to tell you. But the truth is you're adopted. And because you're adopted, you're not really a Kohen. My husband's a Kohen, but you're not a Kohen. If that is the case, you're allowed to remarry this woman. Okay, to wish everybody a blessed day. May you be inspired, may you be empowered. Go out into the world and bring down heaven to earth. Bring the fire and the water. Transform the world. And very, very soon to see the coming of Mashiach from Heida V'Meinu. Amen.